So, for part B in our notes today, we are going to be looking at the old brain. And I have that in quotes because it really is just talking about the older structures of the brain. So, with the old brain, I have a picture here. We're going to be looking at the medulla, the pons, which is the brainstem, the midbrain, and the hindbrain or the cerebellum. Okay, we are not going to be looking at this pink, which is the forebrain. So, one thing to know is that the brain evolved from the bottom up and inside out. So, if we just like in the video that we had watched before, looking at the parts that we share with animals, we're going to see how we really have that hindbrain and midbrain, and that how our forebrain is really different than animals. Okay, so again, when we look at the old brain, it's the older structures of the brain. So what we're going to be doing here is we are going to be drawing a diagram, but I have that same diagram that we just looked at over on the left-hand side of the screen, so you can have a better visual of what the brain looks like. So again, we already have the old brain and the older brain structures listed. So now what we're going to do is we're going to draw parts of the brain. So in blue here, I'm going to be drawing the brainstem. And that brainstem is going to be very important for basic life functionings. So the first part we're going to look at is the medulla, which is number one. What I want you to think about with the medulla is that this is our body's life support center. This means that your life would be most immediately threatened if this part were damaged. This helps regulate breathing, heart rate, etc. The next part that we're looking at, number two, is the pons. And the pons is where the nerves cross from the left hemisphere over to the right side of your body, and from the right hemisphere over to your left side of the body. This also has, and it looks like it may have gotten cut off, this also is going to help produce chemicals with sleep. So this structure here, I'm just drawing in the midbrain. We had already reviewed it in the previous lesson, but I just want to show it to you where it is in the diagram. So for this next part, this is actually looking at it the opposite way. So the image we were looking at before and how we're drawing it is the right hemisphere. What we're looking at here is that red structure in the diagram, but I just drew it in a different light blue within the brainstem. And this is called the reticular formation. So the reticular formation is going to be again, it's the red in the graphic, okay, but we drew it in a different color blue in our drawing. Now what the reticular formation does is it arouses the forebrain, which this means it wakes up the forebrain. So if this part were damaged, a person would permanently be in a coma because they would never wake up. And that would assume that there was permanent damage. Okay, so again, this part is going to wake up the forebrain. So I'm going to go back to this diagram here, and we're going to draw the cerebellum. And I'm doing this in a different color just because it's not part of the brainstem. So the cerebellum is really important for nonverbal learning. So what does that mean? Things like walking, things like riding your bike. Okay, it also is going to help us with fine motor movement. So fine motor movement is going to be things like playing an instrument and writing with a pencil or pen like you are right now. It's also responsible for balance. So when somebody consumes alcohol, okay, this part is affected significantly because people are going to lose their balance. Now we're going to switch gears here and we're going to look at the limbic system. Okay, so this limbic system is in green here, and these are the four structures that we're going to be looking at: the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. So let's go ahead and write down limbic system. And what we'd like to know about this is also known as the reward pleasure center. So the reward pleasure center is a part of the brain that's going to be active when we experience pleasure. And this is something that we're going to seek out. So it could be things like eating or a text notification on your phone, or it could be things like sexual behavior and drug addiction. So that really varies for what it activates. So let's first look at the thalamus. So the thalamus is known as the sensory routing station. And the sensory routing station here is what this means is that all senses except smell are going to go through the thalamus. So when we look at this, it's going to be if the senses are going to go from the eyes to the thalamus to the occipital lobe, or the ears to the thalamus to the temporal lobe. So if you can think of it like a router, it's going to route all the data to different parts of your house. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. This part of the brain is going to route the information from this one spot to the other parts of the brain. The next structure we're looking at is the hypothalamus. So we're going to draw it right below the thalamus. So the hypothalamus is responsible for homeostasis within our body. And a way that we're going to remember this is the 4 F's. Okay, so homeostasis is going to be things like body temperature regulation. Okay, so we want to make sure that we maintain that consistent body temperature. So the 4 F's are going to be this. Okay, so the first F is really a combo. It's fight, flight, freeze. Okay, so we have it activates the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So that first F is fight, flight, freeze. The second one is going to be feeding. Okay, so feeding is going to be that it helps regulate hunger. So when I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. And then when I am full, I will stop eating. And then the final F is sexual behavior, which would be fornication. Okay, so that means sexual behavior. I think it's outside of marriage, but it's an F. So that's why we're using it. So we have fight, flight, freeze, Fahrenheit. Oh, I forgot that one. Fahrenheit is going to be the body temperature, feeding, and then fornication. The third structure we're looking at is the hippocampus. So we're going to draw this horseshoe type object around the thalamus. And again, the hippocampus is, or this is called the hippocampus. So the hippocampus has to do with memory formation. And a way that we can remember this is that a hippo always remembers his way around campus. So this is going to help us get that information into our long-term memory so that we can hold those memories, but it also is going to help us with our short-term memory. Now, the last part that we're looking at here is we're going to draw these little circle structures at the end of the hippocampus, and it is called the amygdala. So the amygdala is responsible for negative emotions. Okay, so especially fear. And what I want you to remember here is that it's going to be, I want you to think of somebody named Amy G. Dalla, who's really mean. And Amy G. Dalla makes everyone afraid, and she has a lot of negative emotion.